Today, we have a guest who's a true veteran in the world of operations and supply chain. You've worked in both startup and Fortune 500 companies, right? Out of those two, which one has been the best part of your journey?
Like both have strengths. I work with Best Buy, I work with AT&T, work with some great companies.
In terms of transformation, the mindset that you need to scale this operation from 7 people to 7,000 people, what is that mindset shift that you have to work towards the leadership around you to help that operations run effectively? Do you balance the traditional cost reduction mindset versus the customer experience? This is where we need to do the enhancement. How do you balance that in your career?
I would even say back to the previous question, it's really the book from good to great. You cannot cut costs at the expense of the customer experience. Reverse logistics is interesting to me because it wasn't even a term when I first started my career.
Yeah, and I love that phrase, right? Inspect what you expect. Welcome, everyone, to the Vserve Ebusiness Solution podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of industry's great experts to share their experience and gather some helpful tips along the way. I'm Cynthia, your host, and today we have a guest who's a true veteran in the world of operations and supply chain. He's a seasoned chief operating officer, a chief supply chain officer. He has a proven track record of driving double-digit performing gains in cost, revenue, service. He's led transformation efforts in both startups and Fortune 100 enterprises, bringing data-driven and result-focused approach to every challenge. So please give a warm welcome to Scott Huddle. Scott, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Cynthia. Pleasure to be here.
Same here, Scott. We are very excited to learn about your journey. And I always start with that first question: why supply chain? How did you get into it? I would love to hear everything from the beginning to now.
Yeah, well, it was an iterative process. I first started out in manufacturing and I really enjoyed shop floor management, managing union employees and the immediacy of result. I migrated into a quality engineer somewhat out of necessity. We were in a recession. That was the job that was available. I really enjoyed it and did well, saved a bunch of money.
So it was an iterative process, really. I started out in manufacturing and I was managing union workers on the shop floor. I actually enjoyed that, the immediacy of the results and challenge of leadership. But it was a recession and it changed job locations. The quality engineer job was the first thing available. And I was working with our suppliers by doing that, saved a ton of money. I got a trophy and an award. And so I got a lot of positive reinforcement thanks to my leadership for recognizing me. A couple of years later, I came back to that and took a supplier quality engineering job. So it was dedicated to working with suppliers. And again, I got Six Sigma training, worked with some of our most problem suppliers, got some great results out of it. And I really enjoyed that. I later went to grad school and realized supply chain strategy consulting was really what I had been doing. Now I could go somewhere in a consulting services environment. The things that I realized, the things I enjoyed were actually being paid and rewarded very handsomely. So I jumped in with both feet for that. Worked with Accenture and their supply chain strategy practice, worked with multiple Fortune 500 companies, worked with some very talented people, was able to build an incredible network and companies and really haven't turned back ever since. That was really the inspiration.
So you've worked in both startup and Fortune 500 companies, right? Out of those two, which one has been the best part of your journey?
Like both have strengths. I worked with Best Buy, I worked with AT&T, worked with some great companies, and I had a great opportunity to work on some really important projects. That was good for my own learning experience and background, but certainly enjoyed the startup opportunity. I left AT&T after about 7 years, went to a 20-person startup, and we grew that like 7x over the next 9 years. It was an incredible opportunity. I enjoyed the lack of bureaucracy, any good idea. It was a very short path to approval. And, so the speed, the efficiency, And the willingness to change was certainly faster than a lot of the Fortune 500 companies. The Fortune 500 companies have those controls out of necessity. In a startup world, there's no safety net. The people who are really good tend to do great in a startup type of environment because of that.
In terms of transformation, the mindset that you need to scale this operation from 7 people to 7,000 people, what is that mindset shift that you have to work towards the leadership around you to help that operations run effectively?
There was a project very early in my tenure with Singular Wireless at the time, before some of the
Mhm.
others. We had a project called Direct Fulfillment 3000, DF 3000. We were focused on being able to do, as a goal, 3,000 orders per hour. And that would equate to about 12 million orders per year on a two-shift operation, going 5 days a week. We brought in outside experts, technical IT experts, test the speed of our interfaces, the full cycle response time. And we had issues. I think the key takeaways from that were setting a big, bold, audacious goal, because that goal was probably 10x where we were at the time.
Mhm.
But we knew what the growth trajectory was. And we also knew that we had peak hours that did start to approach maybe half of that goal. I learned the value of having very big, ambitious goals. And it really
Mhm.
forced us to think outside the box and be very detailed in the end-to-end process, not just the physical process, but the systemic process. It led us to some great insights and the need for investment in our infrastructure and our integrations, which really unlocked our potential as an organization.
Yeah, like dream big so you can achieve big, right? So I've
Right.
heard that before. I think it's such a great mindset to have, but it's so hard to get people out of that traditional viewpoint and to do that stuff. So, how do you approach that? How do you balance the traditional cost reduction mindset versus this customer experience? This is where we need to do the enhancements. How do you balance that in your career?
Yeah, I would even say, back to the previous question, it's really the book From Good to Great, that, mediocrity is the enemy, so never settle. So there really is a
Yeah.
value in setting those ambitious goals. But back to balancing the cost
Yeah.
reduction and customer service, I've had a unique experience throughout my career because I worked with products where customer service was the number one. We were very high margin insurance businesses, and we needed to provide a white glove service to our customers. If we took your order today, it needed to deliver tomorrow, even if that order came in at midnight. That was a challenge that I had multiple stops through my career. And it was really solve the customer problem first, is that you cannot cut costs at the expense of the customer experience. I think that's non-traditional for most operational people that are in a cost reduction environment. I was in a unique position, multiple stops in my career, where customer experience actually mattered more. And so it
Yeah.
was solve the customer experience and then come back and figure out how to optimize that from a cost standpoint later. Broadly, I've always had a list of continuous improvement projects, and I would force
Yeah.
rank on different dimensions: cost, service, revenue growth, regulatory mandates, things like that. I would have a hybrid force ranking mechanism. And
Mhm.
if I had leadership come to me and said, hey, we do have to cut costs, then we would focus on the biggest cost reduction opportunities. And it was easy to look at those.
And it always fascinates me in the terms of metrics that you guys use here. What are your top 3 or 5 metrics that you look at when you're making these decisions?
Unit cost is cost per unit, cost per order. Those things are important. The service net promoter score has been a great metric from a customer service standpoint. And I've used that in large Fortune 500 companies to highlight when processes and customer experiences are broken. I'm a huge fan of that. It's very
Mhm.
hard to get a good score. And when you don't get a good score, it's very obvious that you have a problem. Being able to do like a Pareto analysis on frequency of problem and the impact of those problems, and then highlighting which projects are active versus not, I have found to be very insightful. One client in
Mhm.
particular, where the projects they were working on were quite frankly, the least important ones. I think it's very important to always hold yourself accountable to, are you working on what's considered the biggest problem, especially to your customer, even if it's an internal customer.
Exactly. At this point, when we talk about cost reduction, it becomes imperative that companies look at outsourcing these services as well. In your career, whether it's been Fortune 500 companies or startups, how has that played a role? How have you helped companies become more efficient with those services?
The reverse logistics is interesting to me because it wasn't even a term when I first started my career. I met a guy a few months ago who claims that he coined the phrase back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Reverse logistics is very much the Wild West. There is still a ton of innovation going on, continued sophistication, automation, specialization. I've just found it completely fascinating to see it evolve over the years. I was involved in the early days when it first became a phrase. I'm seeing a lot more investment in people, resources, technology, and
Yeah.
sophistication because people are specializing. And I expect that to continue. The age of AI feels like the possibilities are endless.
Over the years, you've had many stories of how you've transitioned and how you've helped leaders go from one area to the other. I would love to hear an operational digital transformation excellence of your business results. Like, how did you do it? What has been the measurable points that, kind of worked throughout the process? Then what was the result?
Early in my career, I was surprised to see a Fortune 500 company tracking inventory on Post-it notes and Excel spreadsheets. And we automated that. We added barcode scanners, serialized tracking labels, integration into tracking systems, planning systems, or financial systems, ultimately $150 million in inventory out of the network. Because when you had all those manual processes and failed processes, it was very obvious where we had so much surplus inventory. A recent example is at my most recent employer, we added a mobile app to add scanning of all of our devices that we would pick up in the field. We were previously blind to what was in the network. We knew when a customer dropped it off, and then it showed up at our warehouse 3 days, 5 days later. So we added mobile tracking to know where those devices were within our third-party logistics providers network, and they were scanning it through their network. That was just one step of the digital automation process. We had some other issues, but ultimately we were able to virtually eliminate shrink, and it added up to about 3% of our total sales, which
Yeah.
was a massive lift to profitability. Generally, there's no silver bullet. You have to think holistically. That was the case with this. There were other things that were going wrong in the network, but being able to unlock that kind of value with just a small mobile app with minimal development was pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's amazing. And there's so many back office functions that a lot of these companies overlook, like financial stuff, warranty management, data integration, catalog management. To have an internal resource work on that is somehow a waste of time for most of these companies. So have you seen companies over your period of time outsourcing these services to get more on their ROIs? How has that played out in your career?
Yes, that gets into some of the sophistication and specialization. These vertically integrated companies, which was kind of the model 50 or 100 years ago,
Yeah.
people have outsourced over time to allow companies to focus and specialize on their small piece in the larger puzzle. In the reverse logistics and repair space, what I've noticed and been part of is we've maintained the low complexity, simple repairs, what we would call level one repair. Those generally are done domestically. And use a nearshore option like Mexico, and in some
Yep.
cases, offshoring entirely to Asia for the
Mhm.
more complex repairs. And that's been a very sophisticated model for many people in the consumer electronics industry, and have seen that done with great success.
Yeah. And how do you manage, like now you have teams across multiple countries and regions? How do you manage the cultural aspect or help leaders manage those people?
I think it starts with respect, right? It starts
Mhm.
with, you cannot just outsourcing. Some people think, I'll just hand it over and let them deal with it. But I don't
Yeah.
personally believe in that. I think the more you're involved and in partnership and monitor how they're doing, it's a better result for everyone. Old worked with, he called it inspect what you expect. So if you expect an outsourced provider to perform and do a great job on a quality and cost basis, then you better measure it and make sure that they're doing that. And if they're not, then you need to dig into it with them and find out why. There's a fine line between micromanagement and delegation, but I would not advocate doing either exclusive of the other. There needs to be a balance there.
Yeah. And I love that phrase, right? Inspect what you expect. Because even when we are onboarding anybody, we always mention that we need a manager on site who's going to be looking over things, kind of making sure the last tick of the thing is done before we go further with anything. As we go along, like there's so many measurements, right? Like I always hear different types of measurements of what is actually making impact on businesses. What are some of the metrics or measurements that you guys use that show real business impact, like continuous improvement, lean initiative, beyond cost savings?
Can we pause?
Sure. No. Okay, so we're gonna skip the measurable questions and jump directly to the next question. Perfect. How do we talk about so many pitfalls that companies face while trying to scale from field or service operations and nationally to internationally? What has been some of the common pitfalls you've seen, over the years?
I think they're obvious, but let's call them out and talk about it. The local constraints, it can be things like staff, simple as staffing, geography, language, and competition. Geography, you may think something is close. It may look close on a map, but there may be all kinds
Yeah.
of issues with transit or traffic or something like that. Language is an obvious one. We certainly, over the years, have used language translation tools, but they were never perfect. So it was always critical to have a local native speaker that was fluent and be able to proofread everything. We found some pretty embarrassing issues by doing that. And so you can't just outsource. It's just like AI, right? You can't trust exactly what you get from the computer. And then
Exactly.
competition, it's always important to understand who you're up against. It may change the customer experience expectation, the cost expectation. Again, seems pretty obvious, but walking into a new market, you kind of have to have your head on a swivel and be anticipating, questioning everything.
Yeah, exactly. I do agree with you there. The cultural differences matter when we are doing international stuff, but also internally, we have a lot of issues. When you're going into these transformative stages, the C-level people versus the ground level people, the difference in opinion and understanding. How do you align that? How do you ensure both of them are happy with the transformation that's going to go on?
Yeah, and there's almost like two questions. Just following up on the previous comment, culture is obviously an issue when you're going into a new market, new geography. And as an American, we tend to be very direct and abrupt, and that's not always well received in other cultures. So it's more important to be self-aware and sensitive to how other people learn and like to be managed. Every culture is different. So it is important to go in with an open mind, seeking to first understand expectations with the board level, the C-suite, and as it relates to transformation programs. I think it's important to be honest about risk and potential impacts, potential delays, so that you plan for those. I think some leaders tend to oversimplify and expect perfectionism, and it makes it difficult for people on the ground to say, I need help. It's so much better to have those conversations in a transparent, non-emotional way and do it up front so that it's like, okay, if you identify this is a risk, how do we mitigate it? How do we prevent it? Maybe there are additional resources or additional time, but you make sure it's not assumed that you're going to be perfect. You build into the plan to be as close to perfect as you can.
Exactly. Wow. That's such a good insight that you gave there. And you mentioned AI before, and I forgot to plug in this question in terms of innovations and technologies, especially universal logistics and fulfillment, right? Like it's such a vast area of expertise. What excites you today? I know AI is there, but what other innovations and technologies excite you the most?
I have to say, AI is compelling. I've had the opportunity this year to spend more time doing research on various AI tools. It feels like the whole world is possible. I will say, I recently was touring a facility and they were making me aware of a competitor's facility with
Mhm.
this automated storage and retrieval system where there's basically robots going around the top and going up and down like an elevator to retrieve product. And
Mhm.
you basically eliminate the aisles from a storage capacity utilization, and it can be very much more dense than a traditional warehouse. It doesn't work for all products. For smaller parcel size products, it's a pretty inventive solution. We had it at one of my previous employers many years ago, and the technology was very early stage. We had issues related to very minor seismic activity would knock the robots off the track. The robots back then were down more often than they were up, but
Yeah.
technology is clearly advanced, and it's from an automation and sophistication standpoint. It's exciting to see what's possible.
And when it comes to AI, have you seen any transformations that you have done recently? Is there any examples that you would like to share?
No, I think the things that I've seen, they're all very early stage. There's a lot of companies out there that are going for funding, they're testing. Like I said, I had not spent a lot of time with it prior to this year. So I don't have a great example, but it's great to see all the testing. It's like a giant laboratory experiment.
It's
It's,
everywhere.
it's going to be very interesting to see what people figure out, what works and what doesn't.
Wow. Okay. Well, Scott, this has been such a great conversation and I don't want it to end. So I'm going to ask you a few more questions before our time, especially like I love to ask, what is that one thing that you have learned over the years that you would want the future generations to learn early on in their career?
Well, I'm going to break the rules. I'm going to say two. One is be open to change. It is the one constant, along with death and taxes. Things are going to change. Embrace it because it can be such an incredible opportunity career wise to learn new things and be part of a transformation within your company. So don't ever view that as a negative. View it as an opportunity, embrace it, and make the most of it. The second thing is never rest on your laurels, never be satisfied. We talked about setting those big, ambitious goals. It's really important to force people to think outside the box and challenge themselves. Clearly, I'm a big believer in continuous improvement. I think both of those mindsets are critical to doing that.
Perfect. And what I will always end this podcast with this one question is what is that one big key piece of advice that you would want to give the future business leaders to kind of future proof the whole supply chain, even the customer service operations in the future as AI grows?
It's really an offshoot of the never rest on your laurels, right? Continuously seeking operational excellence, trying to
Mhm.
benchmark and understand what's possible, continually questioning your operating model. Are you really serving your customers as best as you can? Are there things out there like robotics or AI that can help you make a huge step change in service or costs? And so it's really just being open, not just open to new ideas, but embracing and pushing, right? Not
Mhm.
just yourself, but the entire organization to
Yeah.
think differently and more broadly about how you can be better and do more.
So dream big, achieve big. I think
Yeah,
that's what,
back to the beginning.
what we're gonna leave with that.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Scott, this has been a great learning experience for us. I've got some new phrases that I have to put back on my clients when I go back today. Thank you so much for your time for joining us today. I hope this was good for you as well.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Best of luck to you as well. Have a great day.
Thank you, Scott.